she brought up that parable of the servant. Um, and I'll just repeat the sermon again. I mean, the parable. So there's this servant who owes his master a lot of money. And how much was she saying? Like $200 billion. And basically, it's an amount that cannot be repaid, um, not in many lifetimes. And so this servant goes to the master, and he falls at his feet, and he cries and he begs and he says, "Please have mercy upon me, I will pay you back." And the heart of the master is moved, and he feels compassion for this servant, and he forgives him of the whole amount. And so this servant, he goes along his way happily, and he turns a corner, and he sees some other servant who owes him a tiny amount of money. And he grabs this servant by the throat, and he says, and it doesn't matter what he says, but he demands his money. And this servant drops to his feet also, and he grovels, and he pleads, and he begs, and he cries, with the same words that this guy used on his master. But he was indignant, no, he was refusing to listen. And he threw this other servant into a prison. After some time, news of this incident reaches the master, and naturally, he's not very happy, and he executes judgment swiftly on this ungrateful servant. Now, hearing this parable, we may think that, so when somebody owes me money, I have to forgive the debt and forget the whole amount. And that sounds quite consistent with the teachings of Jesus, right? What do you do when someone slaps you on one cheek? You turn the other. What do you do when someone steals your shirt? You give him your coat, your jacket. I'm reminded of a Korean pastor who came to Malaysia. It was very cool. Thank you. Who came to Malaysia a few years ago. No, actually many years ago. Many years ago. And he was giving like a series of talks. And he spoke very mightily by the Spirit, but I don't really remember what he talked about. But this one thing I remember, he was talking about how he educated his son, and how he never used any physical discipline on his son. So no rotan, no caning, no spanking. And all he would do was he would try his best to speak to his son, try to reason with his son, and regardless of how defiant or how rebellious his son was, he would use as much time as possible to speak, to help him to understand. And after the lecture, there was a Q&A session, and multiple people submitted the question that went, now, Pastor, doesn't the Bible say in Proverbs, blah blah, that Proverbs, somewhere in Proverbs, that spare the rod and spoil the child? And up to this day, I remember the look of disappointment on this pastor's face, and also the words of rebuttal that he gave, to reply them. And he said, "You all are so quick to judge. You're so eager to fit things into neat little boxes. Like everything has to be white or black. But you fail to understand that not everything fits into discrete categories. Not everything is black and white. It's actually a continuum of gray. And so it's basically saying that not every situation is the same. Um, Different situations call for different solutions. And of course, a judicious amount of divine wisdom. So again, what do you do when someone owes you money? What do you do when someone offends you? What do you do when someone causes you loss? Jesus tells a parable in Luke chapter 18 of a widow who loses her husband and all that she has to some antagonist. And so she seeks justice for the case, and she goes to find a judge, and she pleads her case to him. And unfortunately, this judge is not a very good one. He refuses to listen, he refuses to entertain her, and probably because she's poor. And he doesn't pick up her case, but she doesn't give up, right? She pleads with him day and night, asking for the same thing. Until one day, he finally has enough of this, and just to humor her, he picks up her case and he avenges the woman. Not because he felt any sympathy for her, but just so that she would leave him alone. And Jesus tells us this parable actually to teach us how that we should be persistent in prayer, to pray continuously, and not give up. But he's also telling us that our Heavenly Father hears our plights and our pleas, and he hears us when we cry out to him the injustices that happen to us. And he wants us to know that he will deliver justice and judgment, but according to his timing. Okay, so here's the testimony. A few years ago, I was looking at my debtors' accounts. So it's a list of companies that owe my company money. And among the names were this company owned by a man we shall call Mr. L. Okay? And the amount was just about 30,000 ringgit, which is not a big amount in our industry because the overhead is also very high. But his debts had been outstanding for 6 years. Okay, and I remember I had tried calling him multiple times throughout the years, and each time he would always have some kind of excuse not to pay, and eventually he didn't even want to answer my calls really. And I remember that I had sent my assistant a few times to try to find him at his office, and every time, conveniently, he would not be around. And the funny thing is that each time my staff would, my assistant, he would send me pictures of each visit to that place. And the first time, the place was a modest place, nothing spectacular, nothing to write home about. But the second time, or the next times, it seems that he has moved, this Mr. L has moved to a very nice big place. I could see pictures of his office and his yard. And the office had nice glass doors and a very nice reception area with receptionist ladies. My assistant sent me all the pictures. But again, the owner of the whole place, he He was like the boogeyman. Um, it's just very hard to find, like the Loch Ness monster or Bigfoot. But I asked my lawyer for advice. So what should we do? And he said, you've already sent three letters of demands over the years, and he has completely ignored you. Okay? So what you should do now is start litigation. Basically, she was asking me to sue him. And I asked, what does that entail? Does it mean a very long and drawn out process where, a lot of back and forth, and then I lose a lot of time and money, and it's really not worth it? And then my lawyer goes, don't worry, we will try to get a summary judgment. A summary judgment is where we try to submit as much evidence to prove to the judge before anything happens. So overwhelming evidence to convince the judge that this is a clear-cut case, open and shut, and that there was no need to go to trial. Okay. So you probably don't even have to go to appear in court. Okay. So that sounded simple to me, and I said, okay, go ahead. Of course, this turned out to be much more complicated and a long, drawn-out process. But the reason I agreed also is because I heard that Mr. L had been doing the same thing that he did to me to many other people, including some of my close business partners. So he was doing this because he was just getting away with it. And this happens all around the world. Nobody had the courage to face him in court. Or nobody thought it was worth the trouble or the money. Okay? So to me, this became less about recovering money, but it became a moral battle. Okay? It was about sending a message to all the players in the industry that this kind of behavior is just not acceptable. And so I felt it was like a responsibility to fight this. If I had the means to do it, it was my responsibility. So we started the legal process against him. And a few weeks later, my lawyer comes back to me and she says, oh, bad news. The summary judgment has been rejected. I mean, it failed. And so you will have to start the trial. And there's no turning back. I thought we could stop it, but she said no, we can't stop. And then she said Mr. L had engaged his own team of lawyers, and they submitted their own counter argument to the judge. And when I read their reply, I was shocked, because in his reply he said that all my claims that he owed me money was false, and that in actual fact he owed me nothing at all, not even a single cent. And my mind was blown. Wow, what does it take for someone to blatantly lie in front of a judge in a court of law? It takes some courage as well. But anyways, now the case would go to trial, and it meant that we had to go to court, all of us, and then testify in front of a judge. This would take a long time, who knows how long. And so now I had to really seriously look at what I was doing, and to look at the case for the first time, actually. And I went through all my records, and the accounts, and then I realized that I really didn't have a strong case against Mr. L. Partly because you know how we do business here in Malaysia. He was a partner from my father's time, my late father's time, And so everything was done traditionally. There was no proper documentation trail. And it was all very informal. And partly also because um, this thing happened so long ago that all the records in my phone were lost. I changed my phone. So, um, yeah, I realized I didn't have a strong case against him. So now I really needed a miracle to win, and I really realized that I had to pray, and pray I did. And there was many incidences where I thought my prayers were answered, um, and I would find some evidence or some witness that was crucial to my case, but then I would be left disappointed. But praise God for a glimmer of hope. I found one witness. He was my former employee, former worker. His name was, we call him a boy. And this a boy. Um, he was the one, he was at the job site 6 years ago. So when I called him, I was very surprised that he still remembered all the details of the job. And he was quite cooperative. He said he would be ready to testify in court if I needed it. So out of gratitude, and yeah, I was kind of happy that he was so cooperative. So I told him, if we win, I'm going to give you half of the winnings. And you can hear the bells of premonition, the sound effects ringing. Yeah, I told him, I'll give you half, okay? Because I was saying that this is not about money, man. This is a moral fight. It's about sending a message, right? So I'll give you half. And then, even as I prayed, doubts would still creep up in my mind because am I really doing the right thing? See, like verses like James chapter 2 verse 6 would come to my mind. Do not the rich oppress you and drag you into the courts. Am I this oppressor? Am I acting unchristlike in doing this? But each time after self-examination, I knew deep down, and I was convinced that this was a battle I had to fight. So months passed by without any progress on my part, and the date of the trial was looming. And 3 days before the trial, my lawyer calls me up, and she was concerned about how I would do under pressure, standing at the witness stand. And so she said, okay, we'll schedule a Zoom meeting. And then in the meeting, she says, okay, on the day of the trial, the defense lawyers, they will try to use all the tricks in the book to try to make you slip up. They will try to cycle you into saying something wrong. Okay? And so we're going to try to do a little practice run. I'm going to role play as the defense lawyer, and you try to answer my questions as best as you can. Okay? And so I said, okay, I'm in. How difficult could it be, right? She gave me the witness statement, and she told me to read out my answers from the statement. It's just like an open book exam, easy. And the first question she shoots at me is, and suddenly it became very serious. She became serious and say, Mr. Ian, nowhere in your submitted documentation do I see any semblance of a purchase order or phone records that my client has ever engaged your services. Would you not agree that your documentation is lacking and that all this is a figment of your imagination? And I was like, well, I guess I agree that our documentation is lacking, but stop. You need to be firm, okay? Don't use words like I guess, don't be wishy-washy. You need to know what you're saying. And then secondly, don't be so quick to agree with the defense, even if they say something that makes sense. Then she asked me some other questions, and some of them were so silly that I laughed. And then she said, don't laugh. Okay, don't ever laugh in the trial. And then by the end of the meeting, I was quite exhausted and quite discouraged. But then I told her, as I told everyone, I told her that I'm not worried because this case is in God's hands, okay? And the outcome will be decided by Him. I told everybody that. And anyways, my lawyer tells me, look, you have one more day before the trial. So do all you can in preparation. Read and reread the witness statement. Try to memorize some of the answers, okay? So that was what I planned to do. It's like 2 days before, 2 days before the trial. And yeah, I had to do a bit of study before this big exam. And I also had to allocate time to travel up to Klang, where the courthouse is. But before I could start my study, this guy named Jonathan called me. That is David's brother. Jonathan called me and said, bro, I need your help to share for chapel sharing tomorrow because nobody else is around. You're the only one who can speak. And of course, my knee-jerk reaction, my first impulse was to say, cannot lah. I have something important to do. I have to go to KL, not KL, I have to go to Klang. And I got all these big things I have to do, man. So basically, no, okay, But then I was impressed with this thought. What a giant hypocrite I would be if I decline him. Because here I was telling everyone, I'm not worried. This thing is in God's hands. I have fully surrendered. I have fully surrendered the outcome, and God's will be done. I'm not worried. But if I change my behavior and the things I do and the way I act because of the case, then doesn't it reveal that I actually do not believe really that this was in God's hands and that He would deliver me? Wouldn't that show that I was still trying to do things in my own strength? 1 Peter 1 verse 7. These trials will show that your faith is genuine. It is being tested as fire tests and purifies gold. So this was a test of faith, and I had come out lacking. God often, He introduces some annoyances, right, in our peace and quiet and the easiness of our lives. He throws a wrench into our plans to reveal our true natures, our true motives, and our true characters. He reveals our defects, and really He reveals how much we really need Him. So thank God for trials. And so I told Jonathan, oh, okay, all right, I'll speak for morning chapel. And I spent my time preparing for the sharing instead of preparing for the trial. But I was at peace. Now I truly was not worried. Okay. Isaiah says in chapter 26 verse 3, Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on Thee, because he trusted in Thee. And after speaking at chapel the next morning, I felt a bit tired, so I went back to take a nap. And this was just hours before the trial. And like the song "With Christ in the Vessel," you can smile at the storm, and you can even sleep sometimes. But I was woken up by a call from my lawyer, and she said she had just gotten off the phone with the defense team, and in an unexpected turn of events, Mr. L has now decided that he doesn't want to go to trial anymore. Okay, he changed his mind, and maybe an angel put the fear of God in his heart or something. But either ways, the battle was already won before it even started, and it was won while I was sleeping. Okay, so now let us look at the story of Jehoshaphat in 2 Chronicles chapter 20. Maybe I'll get some of you to read 2 Chronicles chapter 20. Esther, can you read verse 1 and 2?
Second Chronicle 20 verse 1 and 2. It came to pass after this also that the children of Moab and the children of Ammon, and with them other beside the Ammonites, came against Jehoshaphat to battle. Then there came some that told Jehoshaphat, saying, There cometh a great multitude against thee from beyond the sea on this side Syria, and behold, they be in Hazazon-Tamar, which is an defeat.
Thank you. So we see here the number of enemies confronting Israel is much more than they can bear. It's overwhelming. The same way, the problems in our lives could look like insurmountable, could look impossible to get over. And verse 3, Javin.
Verse 3, New King James Version. And Jehoshaphat feared, and set himself to seek the Lord, and proclaimed a fast for all Judah.
And verse 4.
Verse 4, So Judah gathered together to ask help from the Lord, and from all the cities of Judah they came to seek the Lord.
Thank you. So, being human, naturally we tremble, right? We have fear in the face of overwhelming trials. But the important thing here is that what Jehoshaphat did was that he set himself to seek the Lord. He looked away from his problems and he looked towards his deliverer. And he also gathered all his people to fast and pray with him. And it is important for us too to share our problems with spiritual friends who can pray together with us. Remember the first thing that Daniel did when there was the decree to kill all the wise men in Babylon was to call his friends to pray together with him. And I shared this problem with basically everyone, and who prayed for me for almost a year. And then in verse 5 you see Jehoshaphat, he prays out aloud. And first he praises and adores God for his power and majesty. And then he reminds God of their relationship, that God was their God and they were his people. And he reminds God that they were bearing his name and his reputation was at stake. In my case, I believe that God was in the front of my fight, right? And so when I talk to people, I would say things like, whether I win or lose as a Christian, I'm confident that God's will will be done. God's will be done, and my heart is at peace. And I would send that to the people I talked to when I was doing my investigation, and not because I wanted to show them that I was a good Christian, but because it was also a way to remind God that I was bearing His name, and His reputation was the one which was at stake. So after the trial, my lawyer, I think she also thought I was a weirdo because I spoke to her about God. But after the trial, she was also interested in knowing what I believe, and so I told her some of the things that we believe as Christians. Let's go to verse 10 to 12. Goyi, can you read, please?
10 to 12. And now, behold, the children of Ammon and Moab and Mount Seir, whom thou wouldest not let Israel invade, when they came out of the land of Egypt, but they turned from them and destroyed them not. Behold, I say, how they reward us, to come to cast us out of thy possession, which thou hast given us to inherit. O God, wilt thou not judge them? For we have no might against this great company that cometh against us, neither know we what to do, but our eyes are upon thee.
Thank you. So he's telling God, we really don't know what to do here. You be the one to judge them. And God answers him in verse 15 to 17. Joella, can you read, please?
And he said, Hearken ye, all Judah, and ye inhabitants of Jerusalem, and thou, King Jehoshaphat, thus saith the Lord unto you, be not afraid nor dismayed by reason of this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but God's. Tomorrow go ye down against them. Behold, they come up by the cliff of Ziz, and ye shall find them at the end of the brook, before the wilderness of Jeruel. Ye shall not need to fight in this battle. Set yourselves, stand ye still, and see the salvation of the Lord with you, O Judah and Jerusalem. Fear not, nor be dismayed. Tomorrow go out against them, for the Lord will be with you.
Thank you. So what did Jehoshaphat have to do to win this battle? Basically nothing. All he had to do was stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. And when the battle belongs to the Lord, he fights it for us. All we have to do is to be patient, wait, and surrender. So back to my story. There's a bit of an unfortunate twist at the end. It's a lesson about not making promises. Okay? To be careful in making promises. In Ecclesiastes somewhere, it says, when thou vowest a vow unto God, do not defer to pay it, for he hath no pleasure in fools. Pay that which thou hast vowed. Better is it that thou shouldest not vow, than thou shouldest vow and not pay. Don't make promises to God. In Judges 11, we read a very peculiar story about this guy called Jephthah. And he is a very strong warrior. And so the people appoint him naturally to be the leader to fight against the Ammonites. And so the stakes are high and they are in a dire situation. And in order to prove his sincerity to God, okay, he cries out to God, if you deliver us, he makes this vow, if you deliver us, when I go home, the first thing that comes out from the door of my house, I will offer as a burnt offering And then later, God gives them complete victory over the Ammonites. And so Jephthah goes home. And the first thing that comes up from his door is his daughter, his only daughter. And when we read this story, we can't help but think, what were you thinking, man? What did you expect? But we fail to empathize with Jephthah in that we don't really try to understand his state of mind when he made the promise. And also, if you read his great regret and remorse and sadness when he realized what a big mistake he had made, are we not ourselves prone to making promises that are difficult to keep against our better judgment? So remember my promise to Aboy to give him half of the money, the winnings. I had failed to consider that I have to also pay my lawyer. And my lawyer, the fees racked up about 15,000. So I want 30,000 ringgit. 15,000 is half. If I give half to Aboy, I give half to my lawyer. Then I'm left with a grand total of 0. But I had to do what I had said. So in Psalms 15, it's a very familiar passage where David asks, Lord, who shall abide in thy tabernacle? Who shall dwell in thy holy hill? He that walketh uprightly, of course, and worketh righteousness, and speaks the truth in his heart, sure. But also he that sweareth to his own hurt and changeth not. So the Bible urges us to keep our word as much as possible, even if it costs us dearly. And so what's the conclusion of the whole story? Okay? Yes, we are to forgive our debtors, as Lord says, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And vengeance belongs to the Lord. And who are we, right, to execute judgment on others? And we are to be meek and lowly and harmless as doves. But remember, we also have to be wise as serpents. There are times when God requires us to fight, to stand up against the tides of evil, to gather courage and fight. But when I say fight, it's more like letting God fight for us, so that after the battle is won, we can give praise to Him, and His name will be lifted and glorified. And the fear of God will be put in the hearts of His enemies. And it's really through difficult situations where the power of God can be made manifest more mightily. 2 Corinthians 12 verse 10 says, Therefore I take pleasures in infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions, in distresses, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. So, think about the battles we face today. Do they belong to God? Are we fighting them with our own strength? Do we profess to have surrendered our battles to God, but our behaviors and our actions speak otherwise? So why are we putting on so much unnecessary suffering and so many burdens on ourselves when the battle is already won? And let us strive to build up faith. A faith that allows us to surrender our battles to God, for they belong to Him. A faith that will stand the test of fire. And we can only have that kind of faith when we know who is that we believe Him. And we can only know Him if we spend time in His Word and in prayer. So in closing, I read you James chapter 1, verse 2 and 4, 2 to 4. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect